All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for tuning into Resilient Immigrant KIP session. My name is Vivian Ottobor, and I have with me today Tracie Morgan. And today's session, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, very crucial. Topic for today is state of emergency, navigating immigration policies, changes and challenges. And I know that so many people out there are extremely concerned, are worried about the new presidential administration and all the policy changes that have come through. And that's the reason why we're having this session to come answer these questions at the top of your mind. A lot of people are concerned, they don't know what to do. And some people are not ready to invest in immigration fees just yet without really understanding what they need to do, how they need to navigate this path, and just, having clarity on the right direction to go. And so we have Tracie Morgan. I'm going to turn it over to you, Tracie. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor. My name is Tracie Morgan, and I am an immigration attorney. I am the founder of Hope Immigration in Smyrna, Georgia, kind of north of Atlanta. I've been a practicing attorney for almost 16 years, and I've had Hope Immigration for 12 years. And we practice primarily with family and humanitarian immigration, but we do a little bit of everything. I know just enough to get into trouble when it comes to the employment-based side. So I will go ahead and do that caveat that if there's an employment-based question, I may deflect that and defer to someone with more expertise. But when it comes to the latest executive orders and changes to immigration policy, certainly everybody in our field is on top of it. We're all exhausted, but we're all ready to fight. And so I'm excited to share what I know and what little bit we know about the actual logistics, because I think that's one thing that we're missing, right? Is the logistics, how things will work. We know what Trump wants to work, we just don't know how yet. But we'll get through all of it tonight, and I'm happy to take questions as we go along.
Yes, and Tracie, I just want to say a big thank you. I know that this was such short notice, so I really just appreciate you, your time, your efforts for coming on here to do this. I know it's going to be very powerful, it's going to be very informative, and it's going to help loads of people, right? Now, I know that we've received questions from the immigrant community, we've received questions from the resilient immigrant community, as well as just people who are bystanders who are wondering and they saw the flyers. Now, to everyone who's watching, please feel free if you have questions, specific questions that you would like Tracie to answer, go ahead and put it in the chat. The chat option is open, and Tracie would be able to answer those questions. If you're not comfortable putting those specific questions in the chat, that is absolutely fine. You can email the question to our support email. It is support@resilientimmigrant.org. Again, it is support@resilientimmigrant.org. I have my phone here, so I'm going to be checking for incoming emails. If you're not comfortable putting your questions in the chat, otherwise, of course, the chat is going to be so much easier because we can see it in real time. Otherwise, definitely feel free to send it to the email support@resilientimmigrant.org. Okay, all right. So now let's go ahead and get started because I know people are watching, people are curious, they want to know all about these changes. Tracie, you're the expert. I'm going to turn it to you. What are the loads of changes have come through in just the short couple of days, right? Can you just walk us through the changes that you know affect immigrants the
Absolutely.
most?
Absolutely. President Trump has signed about orders within his first few days in office. 15 of those, give or take, were related to immigration. Some are causing a lot of media attention or getting a lot of media attention. We see the end of birthright citizenship is something that he wants to do, but there have already been multiple lawsuits filed on that, and it's paused for now. And we're confident, as much as you can be in this day and age, that the courts will get it right and that won't go anywhere. But I think the bombastic nature of such a bold move, right? It was designed to create fear and apprehension within the immigrant community, even though it's not if it were to ever go into effect, it would be for people born afterwards, not anyone in the United States now. But what it does is it plants that seed of, am I safe? Are my loved ones safe? I thought I was safe. And you look at people who, like Kamala Harris, who, was born to a mother who was in the United States temporarily. Her father was not a U.S. citizen, so she wouldn't be a U.S. citizen under that executive order. And you just start to go down the spiral. And you look at that as like the first executive order he signed on immigration, and then it snowballs from there. I think people are certainly worried about the orders pertaining to what's happening at the border, the militarization at the border, the ending of CBP 1, which was designed for asylum applicants to enter the United States with permission to tell their story and have their case heard. And that's gone away. But honestly, what I'm telling my team, what I'm telling clients is that a lot of the executive orders aren't impacting people who are already in the United States, who already are on a path to gain status. And we'll certainly get into more details on that in a little bit. But then more recently, in the past few days, we have seen executive orders and memorandum come down from various agencies talking about people who are in the United States undocumented. So for example, one that I think has gotten a lot of media attention, rightfully so, is the executive order, the policy memorandum saying that ICE is no longer prohibited from going to safe locations or sensitive locations, such as schools, churches, places of worship, things like that. That memorandum has been rescinded. They're now allowed in certain circumstances to go into those so-called safe spaces or sensitive spaces. But what I want to let people know is that there are rules that ICE has to follow. They can't just storm into a school and they demand to see everybody's papers. On social media yesterday, you may have seen a story about a school in Chicago who was visited by ICE. It later came out that maybe it wasn't ICE, it was Secret Service. Not sure, but regardless, the moral of that story is that the school was smart. They had procedures in place. They knew who to call when ICE approached them. They knew what documents to ask for. They knew they didn't have to comply with whatever ICE said. ICE has to have what's called a judicial warrant in order to go into any non-public space. So that would be like your home, a place of worship, a school, a place of employment. They have to have that in order to come in, unless you just give them permission. And I think that's so important, is that, we're just used to so many times just saying yes to authority. And I think this is where we need to take a pause, take a breath, and say, does this authority really exist? So a judicial warrant is signed by a judge, usually like in a district court, someone with the under the judiciary, and that can be harder for ICE to obtain. It's rarer to see. What ICE usually has is a warrant for an immigrant's arrest, something that's signed by Department of Homeland Security, by another ICE agent, or maybe an immigration judge. Those don't count. Those don't give someone access to these sensitive locations. It doesn't give someone access to your home, again, unless you open the door and invite them in. And I think that's something important too. I really want to emphasize is that once you let someone in, once you let an ICE agent in, they can talk to anybody in that facility, in that home, about their immigration status. So ICE may come knocking and say, hey, we're looking for Joe Ramirez. He, is suspected of doing X, Y, and Z. Do you know him? Can I come in and talk to you about him? And you're like, well, I don't know him, but sure, you can come on in. You don't know Joe Ramirez, but, there might be people in your house who lack documentation, and now they're in harm's way, which is really awful. So you just want to make sure that you're smart about opening the door and seeing that judicial warrant before you say yes to any type of ICE welcoming into your home or place of business. I've been thinking too about restaurants. There have been some stories about ICE coming to restaurants. I think this one was in New Jersey, and They didn't stop at asking the employees about their immigration status once they were in the restaurant. They started to ask the patrons of the restaurant about their immigration status. And I think about what that looks to the community, and what it looks like to other business owners. They're like, oh, this business had ICE come and visit. Now they're worried that ICE is going to come visit them. But what they don't realize, or maybe don't know yet, is that that's got to be that judicial warrant to get in the door. Or it's got to be like, oh, okay, you say you want in, I'll let you in. So just stories like that, where on one side, you see the school that did the right thing, protected all of its students, all of its teachers. And then on the other side, you see a restaurant that didn't know what to do, and they put their workers and their patrons in harm's way. So that's a lot.
So
That's a
Tracie,
lot.
I wanna just ask a question, right? Because I did see a video very recently online, and this lady was talking about things people should know, especially those who are out of status, those who are undocumented, those who just have expired legal documentation. If they get stopped by ICE, what should they do, right? Especially maybe it's in traffic or at a restaurant, like you said, or just somewhere. If they do get stopped, what are the things they should say? Do they have legal rights to say, I want legal representation? Should they show any form of ID if they do not? Because most people, and I'm being real with you here, is they probably have some form of documentation that is not really valid, or they got it from someone, or they're using someone else's own, right? Or some people might just blot out and lie and say, I'm a citizen or I'm documented, forgetting that these officials have all the tools and resources to look these things up. And you don't want to be caught in a lie, because then it leads to something else. So I want you to give us a practical guideline for people who get stopped unexpectedly, whether it's at a restaurant, their place of work, at their home, in their car, on their way out. What should they do? What should be the things that they should be able to say just to protect themselves?
Absolutely. So if you encounter ICE, and they're starting to ask you questions, the first thing I would ask them back is, am I free to leave? Because if you're not being detained, you don't have to answer anything. You don't have to stay there. And if they say, no, you're not, you should leave. I mean, you're not going to like turn around and bolt and run, but just leave slowly, and you're good. And if they say, no, you are being detained, you're not free to leave, you can exercise your right to remain silent. Everybody in the United States has that right. It doesn't matter what your immigration status is. You want to say, I am going to exercise my right to remain silent. I'm not going to answer any questions until I talk with an attorney, and I'm not going to sign any documents until I talk to an attorney. And then you shut it down. You've told them that you're going to stay silent, and you leave it at that. You can also refuse to show documents. So if they ask you for, your license or your passport or anything else, you can refuse that. Now, if you are under investigation for something, let's say that they say, oh, there was an armed robbery 2 blocks away, you match the profile of the suspect. They can do a pat down of you to see if there are any weapons on you, but without a warrant, they can't go into your belongings, like your backpack, your wallet, your purse, things like that. So again, it's just knowing what your rights are and that you refuse to cooperate, essentially. But you never, ever, ever want to show false documents, because that's going to lead potentially to criminal charges. That's going to lead to maybe some inadmissibility issues when it comes to immigration. And so it's just not worth it. And in immigration law, there are a few things that I call the kiss of death. And one of them is the false claim to U.S. citizenship. If you do that, you are not eligible for anything under the Immigration and Nationality Act. No immigration benefit, ever, ever, ever. There's no way around it. And so once that's on the record, you're done. And so it's just really important not to say anything false, especially a false claim to citizenship, when you're dealing with ICE or any law enforcement agent.
Okay, so I just want to re-emphasize that because a lot of people say things out in the moment because of fear or just how can I protect myself, and you blot out I'm a citizen. Guys, if you say that and it's on record, it's the kiss of death. It stays on record forever and you don't get any benefits. Even if you were on path to citizenship, you would no longer be on path to citizenship again. So please do not lie that you're a US citizen if you are not one. Okay? All right. So Tracie, I want to just mention, I know like there's the suspension of the refugee settlement. You mentioned that as well. The ending birthright citizenship, hopefully, fingers crossed, that doesn't get passed because loads of people literally depend on that. Um, how about the revoking of humanitarian parole programs? Do you know about that
Yeah,
one?
so that
Yeah,
one just
so
breaks my heart.
that one
We
just
work
breaks my
with
heart.
the,
We work
the
with the
Afghan asylum seeking families over the last few years, and they all came in through parole. And now that parole is stopped, you probably heard on the news 1,200 already vetted Afghan family members were denied boarding onto their plane to come to the United States. Their futures are so uncertain. They certainly don't feel safe and won't be safe returning to Afghanistan because their loved ones fought with the U.S. military or trained or supported in some way our U.S. armed forces or have a strong belief in human rights. But it's not just the Afghan program, it's the Uniting for Ukraine program that has come to an end. So, no new entrants with that. The parole programs for Cuban, Haitians, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans has also come to an end. What that means is that people who are already in the United States don't have their parole status revoked, but they won't get it renewed. And so anybody who entered with a parole like that through the Ukraine program, Afghanistan, or one of the other programs, they will need to find another way to stay in the United States. So this is the time while your parole status is still valid, while you still have status, to talk to an experienced immigration attorney to say, hey, I have an employer who might be willing to sponsor me, or I am falling in love with a US citizen. How does that impact me? And so there is some time to try and mitigate the harm. But once that parole expires, one of the memos that came out like at midnight on a Friday was that people with parole status will be a higher priority for enforcement actions. So I don't know again like how this will work in the real world, but once that parole status expires, it sounds like what ICE wants to do is to make them a priority to go and knock on their doors and say, "Hey, your parole expired. All right, do you have something else in the works? And if not, that could be a very fast ticket out of the United States."
Okay. All right. And we're going to jump into questions real quickly. But I just want to, something I heard as well very recently, that Trump has also given authority to the regular police officers to also do the work of ICE. So literally hassle people for their US documentation, ask for their green card, work status, all that kind of stuff. And if they don't have it, they can, follow I don't know what the workflow is, but is this true? Are regular police officers also able to do this now?
So, yes and no, a lawyer's favorite answer, I know. There is a program called 287G, and in Georgia, we're very familiar with it. It deputizes trained local law enforcement to act as immigration officials and to start the paperwork to start the deportation process for someone in the United States without documentation. And so we have had that in various counties throughout the years. The program did go away under former President Biden, but it is coming back. And so what Trump is doing is he's basically saying, you don't necessarily need an agreement. You don't even necessarily need training, but he does want local law enforcement to start acting as ICE officers. And this is going to create a crazy patchwork because there are going to be some jurisdictions that don't have the resources to do it, who don't want to do it for various reasons because one of the best lines I've heard from a police officer was, our job is to serve and protect, period. It's the whole community. It's not like just serve and protect those with paperwork. So, by making law enforcement so-called ICE agents, I mean, that's going to hurt the community at large, because people aren't going to be reporting crimes, and it's just going to just be awful. I kind of run out of words sometimes about how awful things are going to be. But Trump can't order local law enforcement to do anything. He can't order the states to do anything. There is a constitutional protection, it's called commandeering, where basically the federal government can't come in and say, states, you have to do X, Y, and Z. That's not constitutional. And so he can encourage it. He might use the power of the purse through Congress to say, hey, we're not going to give resources, federal resources, to these jurisdictions that don't cooperate. I think that's a tool that he will likely use. But there is no, again, set policy on what this looks like, because the average police officer on the street doesn't have immigration training. They don't know what they're looking at. Is a receipt different than an approval notice, for example? What does that show? What does that mean? And so I think these jurisdictions are going to have a long, hard conversation with leadership to figure out if it's something that they think is in their community's best interest. And hopefully not. But it's one of those things where we have to wait and see what people want to do, what these law enforcement agencies want to do. But they're not going in right now. They don't have the training to do it, to go in today. They may act like it. It feels like the Wild West right now, where anything goes. So they might try. They might, talk a lot of talk and be bold. But ultimately, would it go anywhere right now? I don't think it would, if an officer tried to start deportation proceedings.
Okay. All right. So I think it's just people just need to be aware, because this laws are state by state, but he cannot necessarily mandate. But again, at the end of the day, whether it's the local police officers or law enforcement officers or it's ICE, follow the same guidelines, right? You're not mandated to show any documentation. You can ask to have legal representative. You don't have to approve for them to search you. And then I think the trickiest one is if you hear a knock on your door and you see that it's from ICE. Does ICE wear uniform? I don't know.
They don't always.
Oh wow.
That's where you have your own best advocate and say, who are you? And are you with ICE? Are you with CBP, Customs and Border Protection? For those of us in Georgia, not so much of an issue because we're not on the border, but in other places, certainly. And then again, ask to see that judicial warrant. Have them hold it up to the door or the window. Or if you want to go outside, like if it's me, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'll go out, close the door behind me, and then talk to the officer and ask to see that judicial warrant. But yeah, it is scary.
Okay. All right. So, Tracie, we're going to jump right into the questions. I have loads of questions that people have sent. Again, for you guys who just joined, Tracie is an immigration attorney, and we're going to now go into answering questions that the community has sent in. If you have any questions to ask, you can put it in the chat. If you're not comfortable putting your question in the chat, that is okay. Email your questions to support@resilientimmigrants.org. Okay, all right. So I have one here. I have overstayed my visa. Is there a legal pathway for me to adjust my status, or am I at immediate risk of deportation under the new laws?
All right. So a couple questions there. With overstaying your visa, so much depends on how much you've overstayed. So if you overstay by up to 180 days and you leave the United States, there's no trigger of like unlawful presence bar or anything like that. That's the least harmful. And I also know that on the employment side that there can be a waiver if you're in the United States for 6 months without status. If you stay in the United States 181 days up to a year, 365 days, and then leave the U.S., you're looking at a 3-year bar from returning to the U.S. So that's always going to be a factor. And then finally, if you overstay by more than a year and then leave, you're looking at a 10-year bar from returning to the United States. But I know that this question asked about adjustment of status, which is done here in the United States. And on family-based immigration, so let's say someone marries a U.S. citizen or has a U.S. citizen child who's 21, they're considered an immediate family member. That unlawful presence, that overstay, doesn't count against them. Now, if the family member is a permanent resident, or maybe the family member it's like a sibling, so more removed family member, then that unlawful presence can definitely count against them because they have to be in legal status when they apply for the green card. So that's a tricky one. But then again, like I said, on the employment side, if it's not more than 6 months, there's still hope to get that done. Talked with an experienced employment-based immigration attorney about those options. But generally speaking, I also tell people there's no good guy visa. Like, you're in the United States, you're working hard, you're paying taxes, you're staying out of trouble. And that by itself isn't enough to get you status in the United States. You have to have some sort of sponsor, some hook. Very few people can self-sponsor. Survivors of domestic violence can self-sponsor, for example, if they were married to an abusive U.S. citizen or permanent resident. People with amazing credentials like Oscar winners, people who are doing research on cancer, they can self-sponsor on the employment side, but it's just so very hard. And, I also tell people it might be worth looking at other options where people don't need to go through family or through employment. Like if someone's been a victim of a violent crime or a victim of human trafficking, there are humanitarian options available too. It's kind of twisted in the world of immigration where the sadder the story is, the stronger the case is. And you never hope anyone goes through those situations, but if it happens, there might be some options to be able to stay in the United States and heal.
Okay. All right. So this question, I don't know how. So I have. Well, let me just read it. So it says, "I've heard about changes to DACA under the new administration. If I'm a DACA recipient, how do these changes affect me, and should I renew my status now?"
Excellent question. DACA is always changing. And under the first Trump administration, they didn't terminate the program correctly, which is why it's still caught in the courts now. I would say yes, renew your DACA, get a fresh work permit valid for 2 years, and just extend that as long as you can. Interestingly, last week, Friday, there was a decision out of the Fifth Circuit regarding DACA, and the judge said, I still think DACA is unconstitutional. I don't think the program should be allowed, but I'm not going to hold the case. How do I phrase this? I'm only going to apply a stay, so blocking new cases for Texas, because Texas was the lead state on this lawsuit. And this kind of gets into the legal weeds, but what's interesting is that under Trump, kind of the not the legal compromise, but what the courts ended up doing was saying, we're going to let people continue to renew their DACA, but we're not going to allow new applicants. That was kind of the compromise they came up with while everything is working through the court system. So what this judge has done in the Fifth Circuit is he's opened the door now for anybody outside of Texas to apply for initial DACA, which has not been an option really since I think 2017. There was a brief window in 2021, but those cases are just sitting at USCIS. They were never adjudicated. So all of that to say, I don't know what the administration will do with that information. I'm hoping that USCIS will, follow the judge's order and say, okay, we now have to start to adjudicate and accept initial DACA applications, which would open this up to thousands more people. And so there's a little ray of hope there. Again, it's just going to depend on what Trump tells the Department of Homeland Security to do with these applications. But the judge made it clear, so we'll see. I'm hopeful.
Okay. All right. So fingers crossed. And what this is people outside of Dallas, Texas, right,
Outside of
are
Texas.
able to go in.
Outside of Texas.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. This next question came in very recently. Let me read it out to you. It's the whole paragraph. All right. Let's see. I have a green card. I was denied citizenship. My case is still under appeal in New Jersey. My children are 18 and 17. The 18-year-old is already in college, and my 17-year-old is graduating. My children have been here over 8 years. They went to high school, middle school, and some elementary. How does these rules affect them being undocumented? Does this mean they can no longer go to school or get grants to go to school anymore?
All right. So up and through the age of 18, well, really through high school, because not everybody graduates at 18, but every child in the United States has the right to a public education. That's been decided by the US Supreme Court. It doesn't matter their immigration status. And so, yes, your children have the right to go to school. There are safety concerns, like we've talked about, making sure that school is aware of what their rights and obligations are regarding their students' immigration status information and who they allow in the building. There could also be issues, of your children walking to school and, they throw a rock at a car and the police see it and they start to ask questions. Again, it's just, there's so many what ifs. But anybody in the United States without status is certainly at more of a risk today than they were a week ago. So, they can go to school, but they just need to be smart about what they're doing. In terms of colleges, every college is going to have their own standards and regulations. In Georgia, for example, there are 5 colleges statewide that people who are undocumented can't get accepted to because it's publicly funded. But private schools are an option. And then you get into costs and things like that, but it's just a school by school, state by state decision. Again, certainly don't claim on any sort of financial forms that your kids are US citizens. If you do that, that still gets stuck to them. Children have a little bit more wiggle room. It's not immediately the kiss of death, but it is going to be really hard to overcome all of that. What I would say, though, is that if your children entered the US legally with a visa and you're a permanent resident, start the process. It is longer if you're not a US citizen, but start the process to get them status. Having a receipt, even just an I-130, which is the family petition to show the relationship, that's not a cure-all. That doesn't protect from deportation, but it does show an agent that a process is underway, that someone is trying to become legalized in the United States. And whenever they can exercise some discretion and some humanity, that will go a really long way, because if they have room in their van for one more person and one has a receipt and one doesn't, they're going to take the person who doesn't have a receipt. At least that's what would make sense to me. So I would definitely talk to an immigration attorney about what you can do for your kids, even when you're not a US citizen.
Okay. All right. So green card holder, had children are not citizens, undocumented. Um, First thing is they need to be smart where they are going to, the things they're doing. If anyone stops them, she needs to start teaching them the things to say, prepping them so that they are ready. In terms of will they still be able to receive grants and go to school? So up until high school, it's free for every child, whether or not they are documented or not. But when it comes to colleges, the state colleges or public funded colleges, the answer is no. But then there are options for private colleges that they can go to. And then the advice now is try and apply as soon as possible, because you're better off, the children are better off if they are in some type of pathway to having their citizenship. So an I-130 or any form of something to say I've put in an application and this process is ongoing. Okay. All right. Just wanted to break that down. Did I get everything
Absolutely.
correctly?
And if I can, just really quickly, if you are in the United States and your children don't know that they're undocumented, you haven't had that conversation you have to have that conversation now, because they're going to have to hold themselves out differently. They're going to have to be wiser, smarter. They're going to have to know what to say and do if something happens. And if they are like saying, la-di-da, I'm a US citizen, I can do whatever I want, they're going to get in a heap of trouble real quick. And so you've got to be honest with your kids. And I know it's so hard. But speaking of kids, that just came to mind.
That just brought shivers down my spine because this is not a topic that a child wants to have because they didn't choose this life. You know what I mean? And I can only imagine how difficult it would be to tell, a child like, okay, you have to be careful, you have to watch your back, you cannot say you are a citizen because that can lead to a whole box of things that we don't even want to unbox. So, but I think that's very good that you pointed that out. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go back to the list of questions. So this question here says, I'm afraid to apply for public benefits because of the public charge rule. What benefits can I safely access without affecting my immigration status or future applications?
All right. So public charge was a big issue under the first Trump administration. We might remember he created a new form, an affidavit of self-sufficiency, where he was like, no, we only want people who are educated, who have a certain level of English skills, who are healthy, to be allowed green cards in the United States. That hasn't come back yet. It most likely will try to come back, or some version of it. But public charge is a tool that the president can use to try and block more immigrants from the United States. Now, what I would tell you is that some public benefits are absolutely fine. So, for example, emergency Medicaid if you're pregnant, that is allowed. But then there are some things like food stamps that are not allowed. And every state is going to have different guidelines on this. And so it's really important to talk to your Department of Health and Human Services office locally to see what you qualify for. And again, you have to be honest with your status. There are also some types of immigration status, though, where public charge doesn't count. So, for example, if you've had temporary protected status and have been working legally for at least 10 years, you likely have 40 credits under Social Security. If that's true, you're not having to fill out an affidavit of support. If you are, someone who's been filing under the Victims Against Women Act, so survivors of domestic violence, they're not subject to the public charge. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just a simple yes or no, and this is what you qualify for. It's going to be really specific to your situation. But generally speaking, if you don't have documentation, you're not going to get any sort of public benefits except for those emergency situations that we talked about. But what I will say is, if you're undocumented, but your children are not, your children were born in the United States, they can get public benefits. It doesn't count against you if someone in your household is getting the benefits. So don't let your immigration status or lack thereof stop your family members from getting benefits that they may be entitled to.
Okay, all right. So I hope that person is listening. Okay, so another question here. I am eligible for, and you just mentioned TPS and VAWA. So I'm eligible for both TPS and VAWA. Should I apply for both, or will one application affect the other?
So generally speaking, you can have multiple applications pending with immigration. And what I will say is TPS is under the president's authority. He and the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary of Homeland Security, they designate the countries, and they can also take it away. Now, they have to do it with rules and regulations, with a process. But we know that President Trump is not a fan of TPS, and that I suspect that this form of benefit, of immigration benefit, will be, he'll try to phase it out. If you're eligible for VAWA, VAWA is in the law. Law is controlled by Congress. And I know that, certainly Congress is controlled by Republicans right now, and they'll do what President Trump wants for the most part. But it is a lot harder to change the law than it is to change a policy. And so TPS is a policy, that's a little bit more flimsy. VAWA is law, that's more secure. What I will say though is TPS, you might get approved within 6 months. VAWA right now, to get an approval on a VAWA case, it's going to take close to about 3.5 years. So sometimes it's smart to apply for both, because you get approved for one, you get your work permit, while you wait for the more secure way to move forward and have a more long-term solution. VAWA will also lead to a green card application if you're eligible, whereas TPS will not. So VAWA is generally a better long-term solution.
Okay. All right. I hope that answers that person's question. All right. I have another one. I am already on the list for deportation, and we haven't really talked about deportation yet. So this question says, I'm already on the list for deportation. Is there any way to stop or delay the process? What steps can I take to fight my case? What should I do now?
All right. So when you say on the list for deportation, there are different phases of the deportation process. Does that mean the person is actually in proceedings and they haven't seen a judge yet? Or does it mean they have a final order of deportation? Because there are two distinct phases. If somebody is in deportation proceedings, that is, they have a pending court date, they're going to tell their story to a judge at some point in the future. Number one, talk to an experienced attorney because they can help you tell your story. When you're in the courtroom, it will often feel like the ICE attorney and the judge against you, the immigrant. And so you want to have someone on your side who understands the law and can represent you ethically and efficiently. Now, if you have already gone through the deportation process and have an order of deportation, and I'll just pause here because people think they get ordered deported, they're put on a plane the next day. That's not generally how it works. You get an order of deportation, you're told to leave by a certain time, and you might get a letter, it's called a bag and baggage letter, to report to ICE on a certain time and date to be flown back to your home country. But in those circumstances, number one, you always have the right to appeal a decision within 30 days of that decision. So if that time has passed, that's gone. But you can also work with an attorney to get what's called a stay of removal, basically asking ICE to not remove you because of certain humanitarian issues. Generally, these are going to be medical issues, like if someone has a transplant and needs to receive treatment here in the United States. That's been a reason for ICE does not execute that order of deportation. So there are some options. It's never easy, but there's always hope too, until you're on that plane and the door is closed. I have not had this happen, but I know of attorneys who have gotten people off deportation flights with stays of removal. So like I said, it's until that door is closed, there's still hope.
Okay, so there's still hope. I like that. All right. This question here, and this is actually the last question that I have so far that has come in. For those who are watching, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or you can send it directly to support@resilientimmigrant.org, and we'll have Tracie, who is an immigration attorney, answer your question. All right, so this question is, I am undocumented and I have been a victim of crime. Can I apply for a U visa or any other protective status even if I'm on deportation list?
So yes, so number one, talk with an experienced attorney. This is kind of my specialty area is U visas. So if you're a victim of a qualifying crime, so generally that's going to be a crime of violence, something sexual in nature, or perjury, things like that, you can qualify for a U visa. And the U is amazing because it can waive almost every immigration violation. It doesn't waive, being a Nazi or committing genocide, murder, things like that, or being a national security risk, but it can forgive a deportation order. It can forgive multiple illegal entries into the United States. What's hard with this, though, is again, we kind of see the shifting back and forth of priorities between administrations. Under President Trump the first time, the immigration judges were basically told it doesn't matter if the person has a U visa or has a pending U visa. They can still be granted the U visa if they live in their home country, and they can return to the United States when that visa is granted, and they'll be fine. And so the judges would still have to issue these deportation orders. Under President Biden, if someone had a U visa pending, you could generally get ICE to agree to dismiss the case and not prosecute it anymore, and be able to get out of deportation proceedings and move on with their life, which was amazing. So we don't have clear direction on this yet from the Department of Justice and the Executive Office for Immigration Review on how they'll handle it, but I suspect they'll go back to the old ways and just not care about the U visa. And what they don't tell you when they're saying, oh, you can get your U visa in another country, that's probably going to be a 20-year wait right now because of the backlog. So yeah, I would still fight like tooth and nail, but you've got to start somewhere. Get it filed, get protected. And just like anything with immigration, it's a chess game. One step at a time, one move at a time. Our move depends on what the government move is, and then we just play it out.
All right, this is just for folks who are like me, who don't know about like immigration policies, who are not experts like you, or might have friends or coworkers who are undocumented and don't necessarily know what to do. So, just asking, are there any programs in place? Because again, sometimes some people might not know that some things exist, right? So are there any programs in place that could help people who are undocumented to actually become legal US citizens, or put them on the path to, getting their US citizenship or a green card or something like that? Like, are there any programs or anything in place?
There's some big nonprofits, but they are slammed. And I know it can take a long time to get into places like Catholic Charities or the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, Tapestry and Spiritus. It's hard. And there's no right to legal counsel when you're dealing with immigration. And so you either have to pay for a private attorney, which is expensive. I understand that. Or you have to rely on one of these nonprofits, or you have to go it alone, which is such a frightening prospect. I've seen children in immigration court, 5 years old, no representation, and they're expected to try their case. It's ridiculous. Thankfully, there are organizations dedicated to kids, like Kind Kids in Needs of Defense, for example. But there's really not a great like one-stop shop to find resources. And so it's a matter of like knowing your social networks, asking your friends where have they gone for help, who do they trust. Finding a trusted immigration attorney is tough. I know that there are a lot of immigration attorneys who don't always have their client's best interest at heart. And that's hard. There are notarios out there who aren't lawyers, who are making things worse and charging a crazy amount of money. It's so hard. So I would just say the most important thing is to keep yourself informed. Stay up on the media. Have a consultation with an experienced attorney just to find out what your options are. A good attorney will tell you if there really is nothing. Because we're not interested in taking your money just to like have you end up with nothing and end up in a worse situation. So sometimes the consultation's worth it just to know what the options are, or if there are any options at all. I wish I had better news on that, but it's just an impossibly hard system to navigate, and not a lot of resources for it.
Okay, all right. So it's sad. And then just for the folks who are like up to their neck with all of these things, like they're tired of the hide and seek, and they just want to go back to their home country, because they can no longer live this way. what are their options? Do they just buy a ticket and be on their way? Like, how does that work? Is it that easy? Again, pardon me if I sound ignorant because I really do not know, but I know, let's take a few steps back, right? So because you know, I work with resilient immigrants. I have loads of immigrants who have issues and they bring all of these concerns to me. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to immigration. Resilient immigrants primarily helps immigrants thrive, especially skilled immigrants who are documented. But we still have questions, we still provide support as much as possible. One of the community members currently is living with a US citizen who he married specifically to get a green card. So it was kind of like an agreement. Okay? And this is me being open and honest with you. I'm not mentioning any names, so it's okay. And the person no longer wants to continue with this relationship and for some reason says, I'm not interested in you anymore. Leave my house. And so this individual is literally hopping from church to church, from one charity organization to another, looking for shelter, right? And they don't have food, they're not able to get a job because they're undocumented. So life is really hard for this person. And I just said, just go back. Like it can never be as bad as it is in your home country, especially for the fact that right now it's winter, it's so cold outside, you don't have shelter, you don't have food, no transportation. I don't think life is going to be this hard where you're coming from, where you know people, it's easy for people to actually lend you arms and all of that. So, was that advice wrong? Is it easy for them to do that? Like how does that even work?
So it should be relatively easy to leave. But there's always a caveat. There are stories, and this isn't just, new under Trump, but I have heard stories of people leaving the United States at the airport. They now have, the facial recognition, something gets triggered, and then ICE comes over because, right, it's an international airport. You've got TSA, you've got ICE, you've got CBP right there. And they say, you're in the United States without permission. And then they pull the person away from the plane and they say, we're going to put you in the deportation process. And now this person is in the legal system with they might be detained by ICE, you don't know, but they're not allowed to freely leave, which to me is ridiculous, right? Because we're trying to get them to leave, but I guess they want to do more harm on the way out. And again, like we talked about in the beginning, anyone who's been in the US for more than a year without status is not coming back for at least 10 years. There are some exceptions, but just in general, it's going to be at least a 10-year wait. So, maybe the better option is to leave by car, drive into Mexico, drive into Canada, where you're not dealing with, the agents at the airport. It might be an easier, faster process. Certainly, it's a risk no matter what you do. But in this particular case, we talked about cases of death and immigration, and entering into a false marriage is one of those. If immigration were to find out that this happened, there's no immigration benefit for this person in the future. No tourist visa, nothing. And so I think, the decisions that they made led to, this really like unsolvable solution here in the United States. They won't get status in the United States. They have to tell the truth, and the truth is, going to keep them from getting anything. So there's no point in staying because there's nothing they can get, unfortunately.
That is just very sad. All right, and then you talked a little bit about traveling and the technology being able to like recognize people and all the data and stuff like that. So people who are undocumented, are they able to, is there any risk associated with traveling even within? I know traveling internationally is definitely, it's really high risk. How about traveling even within the United States by plane? Like they have to go to an airport to go from like Atlanta to Texas, right? Is there, should they do that? Is that something that you would recommend, or just, stay away from travel altogether?
I will honestly stay away from travel from airports because what's happened, one of the executive orders is about expedited orders of removal. What that is that it allowed ICE to, take anybody who was within 100 miles of the U.S. border, and if they thought they had been here for, I believe it was 30 days or less, they could just simply remove them from the United States. No right to see a judge, fast track. One of the executive orders announced was that expedited orders of removal can be done anywhere in the United States. And for anyone where the ICE agent thinks that they've been in the United States for 2 years or less. And so that then opens you up to, harm anywhere. You could be in the middle of Kansas and, thousands of miles away from a border, but suddenly this new policy applies to you. So if someone doesn't have documentation, I would stay away from airports. It's just not safe right now. And certainly if traveling by car, if you don't have a valid license, don't be the driver. Um, and yeah, these orders are designed to make life impossible, or at least extremely difficult for anyone in the United States without status. And that's exactly what this is doing.
Okay, all right. So we've gone through all the questions that we received, Tracy, and I know that right now we're getting up, to time. So I just want to, turn it back to you to, you've provided so much information, very helpful answers. I hope, those people who sent in their questions, these responses are, what you're looking for. And then right now you're more informed on what to do next. Tracy, if the community wants to reach out to you, to connect with you, to have, a one-on-one consultation, whatever the case may be, how can they reach out to you? How can they connect with you? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So we are Hope Immigration, and you can certainly go to our website, hopeimmigration.com. And there is a link to self-schedule a consultation, and there are options to do it virtually. So we represent people from all over the country and all over the world. You don't have to be in Georgia. So we can do, we use Google Meets for our appointments. We can do it over the phone. There's an option to come in person as well. We don't offer free consultations just because we want to make sure that we give you the time that you deserve and we're not feeling rushed to go through anything. And it's a service provided. So we definitely would love to talk with anybody who has questions. Again, we don't do employment based. So if you had questions about an H-1B or an L-1A, it's alphabet soup over there. That's not going to be for us. But hopeimmigration.com and schedule an appointment there. You can also email info at hopeimmigration.com. One word, Hope Immigration. And we'll be happy to answer a few questions there to make sure it's worth having a consultation.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. Okay. So for you guys who are viewing, watching from wherever you are around the world, the US, if this has provided any form of value, information to you, or it's going to be helpful to someone you know, a friend, a loved one, please go ahead and share, share, share. We need people to be informed as much as possible. Now is not a time to just feel sad and frustrated, but you have to be aware. And so, with that being said, I want you guys to subscribe to Resilient Immigrant on YouTube. I want you guys to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn so that you're staying up to date with information on what you should do as an immigrant, how to equip yourself, how to thrive. We're all about helping immigrants thrive here. And Tracy, something that we like to do when we have KIP sessions is We want you to just say your name, say your name, say your occupation, what you do, and then say that you stand with resilient
Absolutely.
immigrants.
Prepared to do that. I'm Tracie Morgan. I'm an immigration attorney, and I stand with resilient immigrants.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Tracie, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so, so much. This was great. And thank you, everyone who tuned in. Have a wonderful evening.